So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is parallel session 10 that we are looking for social and behavior perspective. This session should be chaired by Charlie Wilson. Unfortunately, he couldn't join, so I'm taking his role here as chairing this session. So we have 5 presentations in this session.
Brauchst du noch mehr Mehl oder bist du durch mit meinem?
Would you please, mute yourselves, and only the speakers could speak. Please unmute. And I'm going to introduce the speakers, but meanwhile, I would like to say that you can always use the chat function to raise your question, but we will have 10-minute presentation and 5 minutes for Q&A. So then there you can use also the raise hand function to raise your question, and our speakers could respond to you. So I would like to start with Diana, that is our first speakers, together with Brian, that presenting their topic, our research. So please share your screen, and Diana, floor is yours, and please also introduce yourselves and your co-authors. That would be great.
Thanks, Laila, for the introduction. Yes, Bryn from ETH Zurich and I from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam are very glad to be here and to share some recent results from the Sentinel project, who's kind of also co-hosting this whole event here. And in the framework of the project, we kind of link at the moment the Qadian social modeling toolbox with the energy system model Europe Calliope. And we want to present you some first results of this linking exercise here, exploring how different social storylines impact the European energy transition. So if my computer would work, I could also start the next slide. Let's see, I know what I want to say. I mean, the main really aim of this exercise or motivation is really to better integrate social and political aspects in energy models. And as we know, the energy transition means really a whole transition for the energy system, including kind of the societies that will be affected. And most of the energy models that we have at the moment, they are actually, in fact, not very good in representing all this kind of social realities and dynamics. And that's wherefore we developed our social modeling toolbox. Qadian, I actually want to introduce here today. It's not allowing me yet. I have some problems and I don't really know why this is happening. I'm very sorry for that. Try again to share my screen. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Just give the background. So Qadian social modeling toolbox. What is it? Yes, as the name say, it's a toolbox that actually provides different qualitative and quantitative descriptions, specifically of socio-technical and political aspects of the energy transition. And both, as you know, they have an influence here on the overall potential, the rate of the energy related technology and service diffusion, and also the design of the future energy system. We developed Qadian in the framework of Sentinel based on different user needs from both modelers and also users. We kind of interviewed, engaged in different workshops to identify what role different social aspects play and which factors we should actually pick and include into future energy models. And we also built this whole thing on transition theory as well as empirical observations of actual drivers and barriers. One key element of this toolbox are our so-called social storylines that are kind of, you know, you can say like really consistent, but also like really different storylines, how the energy transition could kind of evolve. And they are different really in the sense that they build on specific governance logics to explore specific socio-political developments. The first storyline is actually a so-called government-directed storyline, where it's really focused about kind of really on power and control. You have more like a centered government. The whole energy system will be rather nationally expanded. A large focus is put on energy efficiency, and we see like also many private and public utilities here. While the local people are not that much involved, a little bit as we see it at the moment, but we also see quite some local opposition. The second storyline is so-called market-driven storyline, which is really kind of the cost effectiveness is here in the center. So the energy transition should be as cheap as possible. We rather see here a European expansion of the energy transition with rather centralized systems or production systems. The transition is largely left really to the market actors like bigger corporates, and also relies a lot on technological breakthroughs. Strong corporate ownership, I said, and we have here a like quite high local opposition. And in contrast to that stands the people-powered storyline, which is a lot about local needs, about their local capacities to become actively engaged. So we really focus here on like inclusiveness, having really a regional expansion in the energy transition, which will then lead to a system that is more decentralized and where a lot of citizens and communities hold actually the ownership here. So these three storylines are one kind of key element, but within the different storylines, we also explored specific quantifications, what you can see here. So these are kind of the two key elements, the storylines, and also then the quantitative social parameters. I'm not going into detail here. You will hear later from Bryn which ones we picked now here for our first exercise. And this can really be used by different energy models, energy system models, energy demand models, ABMs, and so on and so forth. And we are at the moment in the stage of trying and exploring this whole process. Just to the quantifications, they are really informed assessments of kind of really either typical future developments, as the three storylines are as well. And we kind of use past observations of trends, but also factors we know that have determined these trends, and rely here on statistical data, on specific policy targets, and draw really specific storyline related conclusions and how this whole thing might develop in the future. And yeah, that was the first exercise now to try this, to try out the quotidian modeling toolbox in the context of your Calipe. And I will give now to Bryn to tell us more how this linking exactly works.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So we take the primarily quantified aspects of the quotidian storylines and use them as a way to constrain and vary the input parameters into the Euro-Calliope model, which is a optimization model looking at least cost for the full energy system of Europe, so cross-sectoral integration for all energy consumers in Europe. And we do this to get feasible energy system configurations which fit with the logic of each of the storylines based on the inputs that we put in. And we can go through those inputs that we have been testing, looking at them one by one. Next slide, Anna. Thank you. So for people powered, the key inputs that we put in was to prioritize rooftop PV, which is more of a logic than necessarily a quantification that we put in, but also heavy limits on transmission capacity, no nuclear capacity, and low battery capacity and limited area for technologies that would be deemed less citizen participation possible. So we limited them in the people-powered one. In the government-directed storyline, we looked at prioritizing the balance between centralized and decentralized electricity supply technologies, a slight increase in the availability of transmission between different countries, bounded nuclear capacity based on government plans for those countries with plans to keep nuclear at certain capacities, and a slightly greater availability of the battery capacity on the continental level, and also use of land, but still maintaining certain land areas as being protected. In the market-driven case, it was no restrictions really. Least cost is all that matters, but limitless in most other regards. And just really to see what would happen if you have no limits at all, and in that extreme case, what the impact is on the system. So we've tested with these inputs to get some results out, and I'm just going to give you some high-level results here. So in the people-powered one, we saw that although we effectively enforced full use of rooftops with PV, isn't enough to just do that. You still need certain amounts of agro PV and onshore and offshore wind to make things happen. And the question then is, how do you ensure citizen participation in a people-powered storyline that matches with that kind of technology deployment? But it still had the most decentralized technology mix, as we would expect based on our inputs, which does allow for citizen participation. But that sort of skewed use of technologies led to a high dependence on battery storage and other technologies to meet demand. Now, battery storage being maximum in the people-powered relative to the other two is kind of counterintuitive, because we actually gave it the least amount of battery capacity in the inputs. But they all stay within those bounds, but the people-powered has the most battery capacity use. In the government-directed storyline, it's the only one with any nuclear capacity, because based on our cost projections that we're using, this lower bound of nuclear capacity is the only way that nuclear ends up in the system. It's uneconomical otherwise to be in there. And there's also a high use of offshore wind and open field PV relative to the other storylines, because it's trying to balance this decentralized and centralized capacity. In the market-driven model, it really gets rid of all uneconomic technologies. So that means getting rid of nuclear capacity, getting rid of quite a lot of offshore wind and rooftop PV use, because those are actually marginally uneconomical relative to onshore wind and open field PV. It is actually relatively decentralized compared to the government-directed storyline. And there's a very high utilization of transmission, and we allowed this high utilization. And what we see is really large exporter countries and really large importer countries happening. So a really big dichotomy of import-export happening when you give it the opportunity to do so. Some other high-level results pertain to land area. And we find that we forced 100% rooftop space utilization in people powered, but we still get 30% of available onshore land utilized and 10% of available offshore area utilized, although this was a small offshore area available. In the government directed, basically no rooftop space utilized, and maybe this would be considered as unrealistic, and this is something we're going to iterate through to outside the testing phase to really, think about lower bound on rooftop space utilization based on current trends, but still a largish amount of onshore land utilized and not very much offshore. In the market driven, really there's no rooftop space utilized and almost no offshore area utilized. And it has a larger available area of onshore land based on technical feasibility only, so it can use protected land and things like that, but it's still only using 27% of available onshore land. So that means that you probably would get away with not using protected areas and things like that. Some of the key sort of big numbers coming out of it is that, as expected, market driven is the least cost storyline. And then there's quite noticeable cost increases by enforcing some of these constraints related to these different storylines in the energy model. So the government directed is 12% more expensive than the market driven one, and 25% more expensive than the people powered. And this is driven in part by the heavy limits on transmission use, but also on the need to use rooftop PV, which ultimately is marginally more expensive for what you get than open field PV and other renewable technologies. So that's sort of a wrap up of the results from me, and I'll send it back to Diana.
Yeah, quickly, thanks a lot, Bryn. Quickly to wrap up, so as Bryn already said, we're going to do kind of further model runs, try to explore a little more about linking CADIA with Calliope, but we also work on other ends to link actually our modeling toolbox also with other an agent-based model, Atom of the Sentinel portfolio, and also other energy demand models. So those are just some kind of briefly next steps. I think key takeaway messages, I think the storylines and the qualifications can provide a way to better represent social and political aspects. There are different social storylines that here we show that they have an impact on the design and the cost of the European energy system. And that's what we're going to explore a little bit further, especially when it comes to spatial differences between the three storylines. And we see that a more decentralized system seems to allow definitely for higher citizen participation, but might be also economically more expensive. So here we of course have to consider that aspects like locally added value are not considered, and also the discussion might be then made if this systems then might be more accepted, that are maybe more expensive but lead actually to a higher acceptance, which is of course a factor that is not economically but highly socially relevant. So you can read more about the Sentinel project if you want to, and now I stop here. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks both. It was a very interesting presentation, a lot to digest. Yeah, it is really difficult. So I would like to invite everyone to use the hand function. Then you can ask the questions in order. So meanwhile, maybe people thinking about the question, I can raise one question. It was very interesting to see this triangle that you are looking. It's very important, I believe. But my question is that how you are manage this scalability of these different, because they are in a different level of the governance, I can say it, and also different level of the scales, and how you manage to put them in a one framework, or you completely derive in a different frameworks. This is it would be great that you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we used for this actually the so-called governance logic that have been developed in a past research project by Foxon et al. From a UK research group. And they kind of, came up with this three scenarios, basically, or three logics, like how the energy transition can evolve. And of course, there are different factors that are kind of related, and they are different in all of the three scenarios. So I think it's interesting to use it and to explore it. But of course, you are totally right. There are a lot of things in, and you cannot take everything into the modeling world, right? So that's why also the step of then really reflecting carefully what can be quantified is really, really essential. Yeah.
Great, thanks for explanation. Any question from the audience? Okay, Nicholas, feel free to also say your words. You can unmute yourself. You put in a chat also.
Hi, Diana. Thanks. Really interesting research. I was wondering, I was a little bit surprised by the high cost intensity of the PV heavy scenario, so the people powered scenario. I was wondering, did you also consider reductions in transmission losses of electricity, and also the provision of local ancillary services in your modeling?
Please go ahead.
Because of the sort of high resolution you'd need to model those, no. But it's not too surprising, because once you get past a certain threshold of rooftop PV implementation, you start putting PV on roofs that are pointing effectively in the wrong direction. So your average capacity factor for your PV installations is going to go down in a way that you wouldn't have with open field PV, at least up to a much further on point. I think it would be something to sort of code in sort of a bit of a cost rebate for rooftop PV that makes up for some of these things. But the inverse effect is that, say, open field PV could be connected almost directly to higher voltage transmission. Rooftop PV would probably be part of distribution grids. And if you're sending a lot of electricity from those distribution grids back into the high voltage grid, you would need extreme levels of reinforcement of local grids that can't really handle that level of electricity. So it goes both ways in a way that we can't necessarily model perfectly at our coarser resolution modeling.
Thanks for
thank you.
Question and answer. Matteo, I see your hands up. If it's a short question, feel free to raise. Otherwise, I will encourage to write it in a chat, because we are running out of time.
Yeah, quite fast. It actually is connected to the previous question. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. And I was wondering if, because I think it makes sense that between the three scenario, the one that is more expensive, or will be the one that where people or powered people. But I was wondering if also consider the distribution of the benefits and the cost among the different actors in the system, because also would be more expensive, but then where are these costs distributed and where are the benefits distributed? Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is definitely, we look at just the cost to the whole system, and you could think of it as a sort of cost to society. But I think what we're going to end up having is sort of a synthesis by the quotidian team, so by Diana and her team, that really looks at how these costs are distributed based on the logics of the storylines. I don't know, Diana, if you've got a bit more to add to that.
Yeah, it's a really relevant aspect, right? And I think that needs to have also some discussion, not to only see the whole cost, but then consider like the whole issue of the distribution of the costs. Yeah, we will see how we can approach it, but definitely I think that's an essential aspect to discuss. As we said, like local dynamics are not considered, right? What are really the benefits also for the local communities that are not accounted in? So there are a lot of benefits from incomes, revenues that definitely add a value locally. So I think that's one of the challenges also, how to approach it. Yeah.
I would also just add that one of the things we're going to look at is going from storylines into Calliope into VEGDIN, which is a macroeconomic model, which would look more at this sort of macroeconomic impacts. And as in the chat, good impact on jobs. I think that would be the kind of thing we would hope to see coming out of VEGDIN when we do this much longer chain of linking models beyond just our two.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I should be a little bit harsh here to move to the next presenter. And I will really encourage that you can continue the discussion in the chat as well. So our next presenter is Diego. Diego, feel free to start sharing your screen.
Okay, I will do that.
Great. And also introduce yourself and start your presentation. Floor is yours. At 10 minutes, I will alarm you. Yep. Okay.
Okay, can you please tell me if you're looking? Yeah. Okay. Give me 1 sec. I will put also the chrono here in front of mine. Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending today the session. I think that the presentation that I will give today really might be very related to the ones that we have just listen to the colleagues. So I'm going to present one part of the project, which is called Why, which is one of the projects which is related to this session and with the overall organization of the conference. And specifically, I will explain how can we create a causal model for understand how the people in their households do investment decisions related to the energy efficiency and of course to the energy transition. So I'm presenting this work today on behalf of my colleague Ana Iriza Larreta that couldn't do that today. So this is a day in which the people can do presentations, but I will do my best for following with the presentation. So yeah, so just to let you know some main ideas. So usually, as you know, maybe the large energy transition, usually when we hear about the energy transitions and the energy efficiency, usually it lays over the shoulders of the tenants, families, in general, the households. However, those households in general are characteristics, have some different characteristics. When it comes to take decisions, usually their designers or the energy auditors and so forth usually thought that we are always super rational at home, where our family routines may impair these rational choices, and usually we think that following a rational traditional model of rational thinking is not the way to go. Moreover, the investments decisions to make towards the energy transition can be completely different depending on the similar different characteristics, such as the cultural, for example, or socioeconomic aspects, or and different aspects that has to be taken into account. Whereas sometimes we found that the proposals that the people provide when it comes to make investments on the household didn't take into account the divides such as the gender divide or the income gap or the cultural divide and so forth. So we have to think in a different ways of presenting this kind of motivation when it comes to understand why we do investments on our homes. And finally, because the Y project used this causal theory, we have found that in the literature, the artificial intelligence methods can achieve good results on modeling the behavior of the people that will take in their homes, and they can predict more or less how the people will do actions. But however, when it comes to make an intervention, a real intervention of a natural experiments, for instance, or really making a randomized control trial, we find that they are not as robust as other methods, such as the causal theory that I have explained before. So, in essence, when it comes to build a model, we have to take into account the individual and the family members that live in a home, the technology and the daily behaviors that they have. We have to understand whether the motivations towards the energy transition is something real or not. And we have to find a method which is robust for making different interventions, as I said before. So for doing that and for creating a causal model that help us to understand how we make those kinds of interventions or changes in our home to be more energy efficient, we have created this methodology that I will not explain in detail because it will take to me much more longer than the 5 minutes that it left for my presentation. But just to let you know that we wanted to divide the problem about investment decisions in different angles or in different dimensions. So it is not the same when we think in making a big investment when we want to refurbish, for instance, the whole building. It is not the same when it comes to change an appliance that we use every day. It is not the same if we speak with the whole community to really do investments in PV panels or batteries and other kind of flexibility assets. And it is not the same motivations that we have when we have to change, for instance, the mobility that we do in our daily life. Not only to buy a new electric vehicle, but also maybe for taking decisions about how we move in our daily routines, how we commute, and so forth. So for understanding those kind of motivations and the determinants behind each of the different fields that I have presented just before, I will just put the focus on this small part, well, small between quotes, of the overall methodology. So we wanted to create a Delphi methodology in a different way of the typical Delphi method that we usually have followed in other previous projects. And what we would like to do was to really understand which were the determinants for making investment decisions on the different 4 fields that I have presented before. So in the first phase, we were working with a way of thinking which is out of the box, which is thinking with scenarios that we have in our life, but maybe not are those real, but could be ideal, plausible, probable, minimum, or base. So we provided to the different experts that we recruit for this Delphi methodology different scenarios for them in which they have to provide for each of the different scenarios different determinants or different factors that they thought that were important to take into account when it comes to make decisions on investments on the different fields. And as you can see here, we provided to them this canvas or this template in which they have to put for each of the different scenarios different sticky notes of the different colors, depending whether the motivations or the determinants were more internals, like for instance, like the values that I have, my beliefs, my attitudes in favor of the environment and so forth, or external factors, such as popularity, if I would like to have then I have to follow an authority, or to be, I don't know, more popular because I will do something which is greener and I want to present myself as a green person. So things like that. And also we try to understand what would be the barriers that could, as I said before, impair the decision of taking an investment decision and the rebound effects of the different scenarios. We've based all the work on the social learning theory from Bandura because we thought that explaining that idea, taking into account the cognitive, environmental, and behavioral factors was an interesting way to go. Then in the second phase, when we obtain all the determinants, we are aiming to a new theory for the behavior change on the decision taking, which is the trans-theoretical model of behavior change, or maybe more common or more well known as the stages of change, and also which is very similar to that one that has been presented before, which could be the transition model. So usually when we have to address a problem, we are not in the same phase to take the role of doing the actions toward solving the problem, but we can be in different stages. So depending on the stage of change in which we are, we have to provide to the people different strategies to motivate and to nudge people to do an action. And so we are in the phase 2 of the proposal that we are presenting here today. The idea is to map the determinants that we have obtained from the first phase for the different stages of the stage of change, as you can see here. So for that is again working with the sticky notes. We will play in a very collaborative and co-creative way with the experts, in which they have to order the determinants to the different stages of the behavior change, and we will understand what are the drivers for transitioning from one stage to another towards reaching the final stage, which is the maintenance. So I will skip that one, just to let you know that in the first phase, it is already over, and we got very many answers from the different experts. We code the determinants following the psychological needs of the people when we have to do an action, and also we base our coding on the self-determination theory, which is a coding in which we do actions depending on how we feel that others or myself can enact some ideas related to our beliefs and values. And for that, I don't want to go into details, but we code according to the colors that you can see here. Autonomy, security, meaning, physicalness, relatedness, popularity, stimulation, competence, and financial security are the psychological needs that we have when we do actions in our daily life. And just some numbers to conclude my presentation, because I know that I'm out of time, Leila. Just to let you know that some results could be that the principal determinant that we found was competence. So very close follow by financial security. Surprisingly, financial security, which is maybe the one that we all of us thought in a rational way, which is the most important psychological need that we need to have very hard when we have to do an investment decision in buildings, was not the best one. So that was something that we have to investigate, and the reasons why we found that. Physicalness did not appear in flexibility, which is not much a surprise, but it is mentioned in more on the buildings and appliances sectors, which is counterintuitive for our point of view. And maybe just to conclude, something that we found in these early results is that the stimulation is mentioned a few times, as the experts probably consider that this kind of investment are quite rational, which seems logical, but maybe is not the way to go when we have to really help the people to do investment decision and transition towards higher stages of the change as following the model that I presented before. So the limitations of the study that we did is that we have not still provided those results to the experts to know how they feel about the results that we have provided. We think that the results are quite robust for creating the causal model that we have to do in the project. So I'm sorry for my 2 minutes over my time. I don't want to take more time for the rest of the participants and presenters, and thank you for listening to me, and my email is there. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Diego. It was very interesting presentation, and thanks for taking the time. Now we have 2 minutes for Q&A. I see Peter raised a question in the chat. So Peter, you can unmute yourself and talk to Diego, and also others, they can raise their hand for questions.
Sure, thank you. I think it's a very short question. I just was curious, what did you mean by physicalness in the second last slide at the end.
You should be.
Thank you for the answer. Something that we usually like to do is to work with cards. Physicalness I have here, so we have all the cards for the psychological needs, and specifically because I was explaining, it's the description that we can give for the physicalness as a psychological need is the feeling that ourselves, for example, our body, our family is healthy, is well off, is well taken care, rather than feeling out of scope, out of the safe or unhealthy. So if we relate this physicalness with the energy transition, it is the way in which we can think ourselves and our family safe in winter, for instance, that we all are comfy at home, that we need this level of comfort that we all need for living our everyday, having our everyday living. So specifically the cards that we use maybe are very broad of scope, but if we try to map with the energy transition, specifically we thought that physicalness is the sense of feeling comfy with ourselves and our relatives at home. So this is very important for taking investment decisions, because maybe we don't have the money or we don't have the, but we want that our relatives will be the more comfortable as possible in the place that we own. That was
perfect. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Matteo, you also raised a very nice question in a chat. Feel free to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Diego, for your presentation. Another quick question. How are you planning to collect the data for parameterizing this casual model? Because I think that's quite challenging also to ensure reliability of the model for long-term scenarios.
Yeah, indeed, this is the more challenging part. So now we are obtaining information just from the experts, but we have to test that with the people in the households. So in parallel with this presentation and this task that we are conducting, we are doing interventions, randomized control trials, natural interventions, natural experiments, in the course of the energy transition in not only in Spain but also in other places, and we are collecting information from the households directly. So not only for the time of use that of the appliances, but also on the rationality when they have to take decisions. For that, we use more qualitative probes to obtain that information rather than technical. And maybe more objective way of obtaining information, but yes, so we are working with the households in more than, for instance, we have just launched an experiment with more than 10,000 households here in Spain, and we are going to conduct similar experiments with other type of households on other countries.
Thanks to both of you, Matteo and Diego. There's more question in the chat. I will encourage you to answer also in the chat, and maybe at the end, if you have time, we can back to that. So we should proceed with the next speaker, which is myself now. So I should both be a speaker and taking the time. So I'm putting my timer here and meanwhile sharing my screen. So I hope now you can see my full screen, hopefully, yes? Perfect, thanks, Diana. So hello, everyone. My name is Leila. I'm a researcher at Mercator Research Institute in Berlin, Germany. And my research focus is on a simulation and modeling of the individual behavior change and social norms, which actually I'm so happy that I'm presenting after Diego, because it's very much linked the concept. And today I'm presenting the research that is ongoing. Actually, we are working on it still with my colleagues at YASA. Alessio also is here in a room, so we will also hear from him. So the aim is that we want to know that how we can basically use this individual and behavior perspective in modeling in a building retrofit dynamics. So bring this microdynamics inside of the building dynamics. So it's important that to know that buildings, the building sector has about 30% of the emission through the electricity and heating. So it's quite an important emitter. So it's important to look through it and to understand the system and how to see that policymakers to support this system. We should really look through the bottom-up dynamics and heterogeneity and complexity in system, because we are now in this sector, there's lots of actors, particularly the households that playing role. So the social behavior changes, infrastructure and services and technology is very important to see these dynamics in this model, in this system. So through this study, we try to come up with a kind of coupling modeling framework to how we can capture these microdynamics which influence on energy demand on the micro level. To do that, the simplest way to show this framework is consists of the two main model, which is a bench agent-based model, which I developed. It's based on a look through the households behavior and social perspective, and looking at how people make a decision, exactly the cognitive process behind each of the decision, particularly about the retrofits and how they are doing the renovation at home. And then these households renovation decisions goes through the building stock model that Alessio developed in YASA, that helps us to understand that how building stock dynamics look like, considering the new construction, demolishing, and renovation. And the aim is that these models actually make a loop and read each other to bring both perspective of the dynamics in one framework. Briefly, I'm talking about the bench agent-based model. The aim is that the aim of the bench model is to investigate the role of the behavior changes and how people make a decision, particularly energy-related decision, through this transition to low carbon economy. So in this model, households are heterogeneous in different way, from the social demographic characteristic like income, age, education, and etc. About the dwelling characteristic, the type of the house that they are living, the floor space, the age of the house, energy label, and the way that they are consuming the energy, what type of the energy that they are using, and what's the primary energy is coming from. And more importantly, we try to capture the behavior and social factors, basically the knowledge and awareness of the people about the energy decisions, the social norm and personal norms. So, and then all the model is calibrated based on empirical data. We run a different household surveys in 2016 and 18 to capture these all these factors. The bench is especially explicit, and then all the behavior rules coming from the agents is based on our data that we gathered through the two regions in EU, Spain, and in Netherlands. So as you see, it's a cognitive process behind each decision. We cannot make a decision in one time. There is a process that you reach the point that you are make a decision on a renovation or insulation or etc. So there's different drivers and barriers. So we capture these drivers and barriers, quantitate them, and then put it in a model. And for the latest version, we are looking for the different investment. This could be like a renovation, like an insulation, could be like putting the solar panel, investing on solar panel or appliances. But in this project, we are just focusing on the first one, which is a renovation and insulation at households. Alessio, it's your slide. It would be great that you give us a little bit information on message buildings model.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Leila. Thanks a lot for inviting me also for the presentation. I will just say a few words on the MessageX buildings that we are developing here at YASA. So this is a framework, a bottom-up framework for modeling the energy demand of buildings. Yes, thank you. And the idea is to combine a building sectoral detailed model with integrated assessment, so with the MessageX Globiome integrated assessment model that we have at YASA. So when it comes to the building stock, the idea of the MessageX buildings is to understand the evolution of the building stock along future scenarios, as well as their energy demand and resources demand. So it combines two main modules. The first one calculates the energy demand of buildings, here especially on space heating and cooling demand based on a variable degree days method. The second module is the STURM, so the building stock turnover model. And here we are using material flow analysis to account for the stock turnover, so the new construction and demolitions of buildings over time. And we combine material flow analysis with a set of discrete choice models, which describe the decision of households in terms of energy efficiency, such as new construction and renovation. So for this specific work with Leila, we basically focus on new construction and demolition on the side of MessageX buildings, and the bench model takes into account the decision of households on renovation, which then we plug into the stock turnover model to understand how they propagate into the future, into the building stock. Yeah, so this model is also flexible. So we have a global implementation. And here in these first case studies, we see instead a national implementation. And also we take into account heterogeneity in the building stock and in different households and housing types. And also a very important part is about the calibration, where we try to establish the base year so that it basically reflects the current state of the building stock for 2015. Next slide, thanks. Yes, so this is an example showing how different housing cohorts are accounted for. So we also divide formal housing and slums. So for the case of Europe, we just have formal housing, and we also have different energy efficiency cohorts. So existing non-renovated buildings in red, belonging to different vintages, and therefore also having different energy demand, energy efficiency levels. Then renovated buildings in yellow and new buildings in green. So the model then along scenarios can then represent how the building stock is evolving and how these existing buildings are progressively renovated or replaced by new buildings. Then I will hand it over again to Leila for the scenarios.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alessio. So as you see, because both model is quite complex model, and we wanted to try it in a simple way, and we believe that we shouldn't put all the complexity in one stage. So we started with the simple way, and we agreed to step by step add the complexity. For the first try, actually, we picked the Netherlands as our case study because we had enough data, particularly on behavior and social aspects. And we run the models. The bench model runs in the two scenarios that I'm going to tell what actually these two scenarios, what it means about the behavior and social end user scenarios. And then the renovation decisions comes from the households decisions, goes to the building stock model. And then through that, we will see that how much is influenced on a total energy demand and how there's basically change over the time, the percentage of the renovation and demolishing and new construction. So in a summary, basically bench model comes with the renovation percentage, and the building model goes through the new constructions and the demolishing in the three main categories that Alessio already presented in a previous slide. So the micro scenarios or end user scenarios in bench model is divided in two main scenarios. One is a kind of the baseline for the bench model, which is a very slow dynamics and social learning through the agents. And the second one, it's a very high, not very high, actually intensive social interaction and basically learning. So this scenario could be a representative of the rapid bottom-up diffusion of the pro-environmental social norms without considering any other top-down policy. So it's a pure social behavior pro-environmental scenarios. In a building stock dynamics, we take the SSP2 scenario as a baseline, and then also the new construction and demolition follows as a current trend. And we aim to see this, how is happens on a demand over time and space. This is a primary result that we have, and as you see, the SD, which is the baseline or slow dynamic model, we have a very short amount of the, very small amount of the renovation and new instructions. But when we are going through the fast dynamics or more social learning and interactions between the agents, we have more renovation rate, and also that it shows that it's basically works over the time. And also we can generate the final energy based on basically final energy use through the both scenarios. This was a very primary result, but what we want to say, what's the main message here is that we want to say that to be able to consider, to be able to implement a proper policy and political feasible policy, we do need to integrate we do need to integrate a micro and bottom-up dynamics into the modeling systems. So agent-based model, which is linked to the empirical or survey data and integrate with the building models, could help to understand these dynamics better. And we went through the stepwise integration to bring to replace representative to the heterogeneous agents, perfect to rational and bounded rationality, and a statistic to adaptive agents, which is learning through the procedure and brings basically as representative of the social norms and nudges. So in summary, if I want to say that for a substantial changes, we do need a mixed external intervention, and to find out which intervention would be the most perfect for this transition, we do need such this modeling framework to test different scenarios and see which of these basically, or most probably combination of that, could help for transition to low carbon economy. This is, as mentioned, this is ongoing research. We are going to the two different approaches to improve this modeling perspective, particularly making the loop complete. We are expecting to see more results out of that. And that's it. I'm finishing here because I think I'm going out of time, and the floor is open for your questions. We are happy to hear your comments. Thanks. Any questions here?
Hello, thank you both for the presentation. I have two short questions, hopefully. First, on the agent-based model, and like what information goes into that about the socioeconomics of the households. Like, are the renovations constrained in any way by the income level of the household?
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for a question. The agent-based model, actually, it's as I mentioned, it's mostly focusing on a cognitive behavior or cognitive process behind each decision. So all the parameters that I mentioned about the social demographic characteristic, dwelling characteristic, and which is also the income, age, and size of the households, or implemented in the model. So, and then calibrate based on the empirical data that we gathered 2 years ago from Netherlands and Spain. So we quantified that and put it in a model, and then we can see that how people basically make a decision through the different perspective, and all is based on a theoretical framework also from the social behavior theories that use that how people make a decision, basically the cognitive behavior. And this already published, so I can send you the couple of the papers that if you need more information on that.
Great, I'm sure I can find it. Thank you. And second question about the renovations. How is renovation implemented in the energy demand model? Is it just like a percentage reduction in energy demand? And is there any difference in the reduction in energy between old houses and new houses when they're renovated, or is it all the same?
Yes, so we have a description of the building stock by building archetypes representing different energy efficiency cohorts, and each of them is characterized by different values and different housing characteristics. And therefore, we run the energy demand calculation for all these archetypes, which also result in different energy demand. So renovated buildings have lower values so it's also better insulation levels and better efficiency of heating systems compared to the non-renovated ones, and therefore there is a lower energy demand, and you can see this reduction over time So we have also, this was considering just one type of renovation, but we also can, apply different strategies, different measures, and represent those in the model.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And I have another raised hand from Enrique.
Yeah, this is a question for both of you. How do you plan to calibrate your models? I mean, do you have a methodology? Do you have a paper you can share? I mean, you can comment something now.
Maybe I can say from my side, from the agent-based model actually is calibrated based on empirical data. And when we did the survey, we tried to capture the different stages. So that's why when we run the model, we can see that how it works very well. But the combination of the building stock model and agent-based model, hopefully it would be possible to run again the survey and then see that our models actually is calibrated very well or not. But maybe Alessi also can add some points here.
Yes, thank you for this question. I think it's very relevant. So for the building stock model, we ran calibration for the base year. So we compared the results in terms of floor space, housing units by vintage, and energy demand levels, where data was available for those. And then we adjusted some of the parameters in the model so to reflect what we observed in the statistical data. But this process is still ongoing because we also want to better understand different dynamics, for instance, renovation. And if the renovation rates that result out of the model also reflect the dynamics we can observe currently in different countries. Of course, data availability is a challenge here because we have, even for Europe, data is limited in some cases. Then when it comes even to other geographical regions such as the global south, developing countries, it's even more challenging.
Great, thanks. Robert, I can see your hand is up. Could you ask a short question because we have 2 more speakers to go?
Thanks. I have no idea. Sorry.
Hey.
Interesting, very interesting insight. I'm thinking a bit about the application, coming back to this, how can the models be more useful to policy? My understanding is you take a lot of the information on what is driving the renovations from the surveys. And I'm wondering how well does this capture, I mean, renovation is, very few people are in the situation to actually renovate, like, and know about the difficulties and know about the challenges of finding a firm that actually would know how to do it well and so on. So did you manage to really get many people that are in this process and can answer well? Because if you just ask people, like anybody who owns a house, they probably don't really know what's hindering from doing it, because just getting aware of it and doing is an important first step, but afterwards come main hurdles, I would say. So
yeah, it's very good question and relevant. Actually, I totally agree with you about it's a really difficult decision. And through our survey, we capture a lot of households actually did a renovation or they are planning to the renovation. And then what we did also, we find out that the neighborhood of that particular household that did renovation did even basically to capture the social norms or how the others could influence. We found out maybe the neighbor did the renovation, and then people started thinking, okay, I should also do the renovation because it's reduced basically the energy. Or in that particular local area, there was some advertisement on a different thing. So these are there's a lot of details that I can talk about that. So all these information gathered, and through that I put a role that how people make these decisions. And then the result was that if you're raising the awareness and knowledge through the different channels, the people will go through the renovation and other aspects of, other basically energy decisions. So that would be also one output for like a policy information policies, kind of to bring more awareness and knowledge to the society. So by the end actually is that when we are integrating these two models, we aim to run different end user scenarios and see which of these basically policies or intervention could help to speed up this renovation or other actions through the transition to low carbon economy. But we capture some information on that through the survey. I can share it with you later on. Thanks for the question. So thanks a lot, everyone. We are going for our next speakers, which is Julian. I believe you can now share your screen and floors is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me? Perfect.
Perfect. We can hear and we can see the screen.
All right. Perfect. Thank you very much, Leila, for the introduction. I'm Julien Marcon. I have a background in optimization applied first to automotive industry, and then I switched to building, and I worked on I have a PhD from ETH Zurich, in collaboration with EMP-E, the Urban Energy System laboratory, in which I developed a methodology framework for the modeling and optimization of distributed energy system in the urban context. So my apologies. The presentation is more on the supply side actually than the behavioral aspect, but they are still included in the input to the framework. The work we did at research, we bridged it with industry to develop this framework within the PhD and postdoc environment, which actually developed in a spin-off, Symphony, Urban Energy Optimized, in which I'm actually working right now. The goal of the presentation is to provide an overview of why we developed a collaborative decision-making platform, which handle multi-objective optimization, to be able to support decision-making, and how is it important to connect it with a digital twin, which is the digital representation actually of the reality and the simulation based. So in the planning process of decentralized urban energy system, where do we stand? We stand after the target or set at the municipality or the national level, and we are looking at the phase where we have the social and technical analysis, where we need to be able to better define the system boundaries, define what is the energy demand following different methodology, as we discussed actually during this session, and being able to determine what are the different energy technologies which could help to supply the given demand, which is part of the study. Define the reference scenario, which allow after to make more advised decision making in terms of what in the decentralized urban energy landscape, which multi-energy system carriers could be implemented in where, in order after to develop further strategic decision for given solution. So in this landscape, we have different actors with which we worked, industry partner, which is from the energy utilities to the actual municipality to the technology provider, in order to define what are the infrastructure constraints for to be able to decentralize the energy system and look at whether system could be installed, for example, at the building scale or within a district. And there is many questions arising, which is the motivation for developing such platform, which allow the collaboration and participative planning of the different actors to be able to develop energy concepts. So we worked on different energy concepts at different scale, for example, at district scale, where we look at how different systems could be combined together in order to make best use of the local energy resources available to provide the given demand, which is actually to be accounted for. We need to have those kind of studies to understand what is the behavioral aspect to better design the system. So what we developed is the possibility to see the interaction of the different energy system together and with a very detailed time resolution in order to look at how to match demand and supply and which system came at which place, or what would be the design and optimal operating strategy for those systems. Looking at the life cycle cost, but also the optimization of the environmental impact and carbon emission. And within those different solutions that the platform can provide, what are the system sizing, capacity, and operating strategy behind each of those different solutions, which can be assessed. So here we look at the trade-off between actually a more life cycle based optimal solution to a more like carbon optimal solution. So the question is really, when different stakeholders, actors, industries work together on the energy concept for a given site, what would be the sizing of the different energy systems and how to reach optimal pathway, given the supply side, but also accounting for, of course, the energy demand, in order to achieve more sustainable objectives, leverage the new energy technology, and also provide a better workflow for industries. So really bridge the research to industry to provide solution, combining leveraging of the digital twin. So it's a digital representation of a given site, including the demand, the resource, different layers, to the optimization algorithm that I'm going to talk about shortly, and provide the possibility for the utilities to look at the different constraints which have been considered for a given site. So we worked during the last 8 years with on different projects in which we applied directly the research within the lab, with in partnership with the different industry and stakeholders to be able to derive the energy concept for different sites in Switzerland. So the aspect of the collaborative workspace is very important because it allows the different stakeholders to be able to, so we have the energy planners, the technology provider, which can input the performance of the technology. The energy planner have candidate energy technology that they want to consider, also based on the constraint from the site owners, which can also define better what would be the end use consumption for a site with different scenarios, which can be also evaluated. So how do we set the scene? We start first to import all the spatial and temporal constraints for a given site, which is also about the infrastructure of the building and the BIM, the BIM. We look at the candidate technology, which could be multi-energy carriers candidate. So we can look at a various combination of technology being able to supply the given end-use demand for a site, and evaluate those solutions for different characteristics in order to be able to have a sensitivity and more robust solution in terms of what are the techno-economical parameters as input to derive the given solutions. And then come up with a trade-off between, in terms of supply solution, which one should be installed, for example, on a given site, whether it makes more sense to import energy based on the end-use consumption, of course. And that allows, with the approach we have at the platform, it allows to leverage also third-party data set where we can connect actually with other partners in order to get the input, which will help, for example, to better assess what is the energy demand for a site and take account different parameters in an iterative approach on which we really connect all the spatial condition boundary to the inputs of our platform, which allow them to form the modeling constraints, which are, so it allows the user to easily define a problem and then form the constraints for the optimization of the supply side. So we account for the resource potential, for example, what are the built environment constraints, what is the existing system infrastructure, the BIM demand, and then the urban planning also at different horizons. Each of those constraints form the basis for the modeling. Now I'm going more on the modeling side. And at EMP-E, we have actually a NEST demonstrator, which is a vertical urban district integration. So it allows to be able to simulate different behavior, different demand profile, because we have the integration of different units, which are for residential use, for offices. There is units also for different activities. We have sport, for example. And the goal is to integrate also different carriers, including a mobility unit, in which we can actually simulate the interaction of multi-energy system carriers, according also to to the given demand, which is analyzed and monitored. And what we are doing now is we are transforming this energy demand that we can also, thanks to the simulator, we are able to assess and to look at the different energy demand model we built, whether they're accurate or not, compare with the real-time measurement system, and include also the technology performance of the different system to our modeling tool, which allow then to derive some supply options, sizing of the system, and operating strategy. The different output is then the design of the system, the operating strategy, and the energy used, as well as emission. The modeling aspect we used, so we have all the system which are considered as on a node level. The node can be based on whether you consider a building, a district, and then what are the candidate solution to provide from the given input the end use demand. And the variables could be what is the operating strategy of the different system, the sizing, or also the input from the grid, for example, while the different constants defined by the user are the boundary condition or parameters which form the system. So we have a coupling matrix which will connect input to output in order to be able in an MILP model to provide already an understanding of the given solution at the design level, so the energy concept level. The number of
sorry, I'm interrupting. Would you please to wrap up the presentation?
Right. So I mean that's the light side actually, which is quite, which I think is the reason why I'm in this session, because it's how we link for agile planning the integration of real-time data to the design. So what we are doing now, we are working with EMP-E again in within the energy lab, boosting energy transition program, in which we connect real-time data now to the modeling side in order to be able to derive based on the real-time data and using machine learning different end-use scenario based on climate change or different parameter, which could be also all the behavioral aspect which can be factored in to be able to do more in a short-term agile planning of the system. So that's it. With that, I conclude. Thank you, Leila, for the. I was looking for the watch. I didn't have the watch. Sorry for that.
That's okay. Perfect. Thank you so much for a presentation. I clap for you also virtually. So floor is open for questions. Anyone have a question here? So maybe till people think, I just have one question. I really like the last slide, which is really also the link through it. And I believe it's very important to link the real-time data. And I believe it's a big data. And that's why you are using the machine learning for this purpose. Would you please a little bit elaborate on that? Is already implemented or is something that is in progress?
So now we are developing the automated workflow, which allow actually through the API, so application programming interface, to connect to the platform the real-time measured data, which come from the Nest unit actually, which is the simulator we have seen. And what is interesting is because the units, there is different, the buildings is a vertical integration of a city. So we have different end use because we have a housing, residential, we have office use, we have, and so we measure the demand for heating, cooling, electricity, as well as linked to of course, to the weather data. And then we use GAN, so CNN, machine neural network type of methodology, to be able to then change some input parameters, such as, for example, we can do some using morphing, do some scenario for the weather files based on the climate change horizon 2050. And then developed based on these weather changes for the given unit profiles and use profile that are used then with different input to try to have some sensitivity on the energy system design results that we get. But the parameters could be also the occupancy level, for example, which are changed for the unit. And the goal is to get as much as possible real profile and compare with simulation based. profile.
Excellent. That's great. And it would be great if you can share some reports or papers is on progress or already done in a chat. So meanwhile, we should move to the next speakers because we are running out of time. So
Thank you, Leila.
Thanks for a great presentation, Julian. Arawan, are you here? Our next presenter.
Hi.
Hey, Arawan, how are you? Please, Julian now is stopping the screen and you can share your screen and floors is yours to start.
Sure. Now I suppose you can see my screen, yeah?
Exactly. And you can maybe make it in a presenter mode that we can see the full screen.
Oh, okay.
Excellent. You can start.
I am Arawan Talagani, and I'm here to discuss a cooperative energy management system for an energy community, which is a citizen-driven community. As you can see, the community that we developed consists of multiple buildings and an aggregator. Sorry, what's going on? An aggregator that acts as the controller of the community. The modeling aimed to optimize the energy exchanges of the energy community with the objective of cost minimization. Also, the model has some constraints such as minimum power line occupation, minimum energy purchase from the main grid, and minimum battery degradation of the buildings. We developed the working algorithm like that. Buildings are responsible for their energy management system, so they need to schedule their flexible loads, and also they need to predict their generation, and then they should create an energy profile after all these energy management things and send this energy profile to the community. The community will optimize and set the exchanges based on the announced available energy and the demands that buildings announce to the community, and send back this schedule to buildings to be executed. And the energy profile could be a diagram like this with positive and negative values. So buildings can offer their available energy as positive values, and also they can announce their demand in each hour if they don't have enough renewable generation, so they face a lack of energy and demand, and they could announce this demand to the community to be satisfied with negative values. And then the model has an objective function with two terms. The first term is responsible for the amount of these exchanges, and the second term is responsible for optimizing the cost of these exchanges, and the interaction between these two terms lead to a trade-off between the amount of exchanges and the cost of exchanges, that we don't want buildings avoid exchanging energy because of its cost, or over exchanging energy to gain profits. So we need a trade-off. And then we need an incentivizing price scheme inside the community. So we developed a pricing scheme like this. If we assume that a day-ahead price is 100% of the price that buildings can purchase energy from the main grid with this price, so buildings are able to sell their energy to the grid with 70% of this price. And we developed this pricing because we faced a problem that buildings could be dealer of energy instead of being a generator of renewable energy. They can purchase energy from the main grid and store it in their storage, and with small fluctuation in the price, they could sell it back to the grid with a profit. So this gap, this 30% gap, could prevent them from being a dealer of energy. Then we set the community price at the 80% of the grid price, so internal exchanges could be more profitable for buildings. Then, as a result, we have the schedule of exchanges inside the community, the schedule of purchasing energy from the main grid, the schedule of selling energy to the main grid for each building, and finally, the schedule of battery operation for each buildings. So, as the schedule of exchanging energy inside the community, the values could be positive or negative. So each building are told that it should inject some amount of energy, or it should absorb some amount of energy from the community with positive and negative values. And they are allowed to exchange energy with the maximum of 10 kilowatts because of the operational constraint of the system. So then, as we can see at the diagram, the schedule of purchasing from the main grid is at only 6 hours, which if we can compare it with the price profile, they are off-peak with the lowest price. And also the amount of purchasing from the main grid start from 0.1 kilowatts to maximum of 1.1 kilowatts, which is a relatively low amount of power that the grid should supply for the community, and this could be concluded that the demand of the main grid is reduced in comparison to the base scenario that there were no community and buildings interact with the main grid individually. And then at the selling schedule, we can see that buildings are told that they could sell their energy with a maximum of 5 kilowatts at each time slot to the main grid. If buildings don't need any energy, I mean the neighbors don't need any energy, they have to sell their excess energy to the main grid. And as we expected, they are not going to sell the energy while they are purchasing energy from the main grid. That indicate the accuracy of the model. And also in the table, we can see the cost of 5 building in base scenario with no community, and at the second row with the participating in the community. So negative values indicate profit. So all negative values is going to increase, and the only building that have the cost building number 1 is going to experience a decrease in its cost. And there are expected profit and cost because the model is a day ahead schedule. And also we can say that targets are achieved as we wanted cost improvement for building and a reduction in energy purchase from the main grid and a reduction in fossil fuel-based energy consumption. Thank you so much. I'm here for your questions.
Very on time. Thanks, Ravon, for a presentation. Any question coming from the audience? We are happy to hear your questions or comments or suggestions. Okay, Till, I think I have one question regarding to this basically the result that you show that there is a different values that you put it for example, 30% they back to the profit or not. How you basically, I mean, in summary, I just want to say that how you can conclude or any policy implementation that you can say as, okay, this should be happened. That would be great to hear.
About the pricing,
yeah, the pricing or the profit that they can get or from the solar.
As I said, we discussed the issue that buildings should not be the dealer of energy. With the same level at selling and purchasing price, any building can use a storage and make profit. Okay, because of this issue, we set this gap for the selling and purchasing energy, purchasing price to prevent them from this attempt. And 30% because that make sure that small fluctuation could not affect the battery charging and receiving energy from the main grid, but it shouldn't be less, so it can affect the storage and purchasing, and it shouldn't be higher because it could reduce the profit and may affect the profit of buildings when they have excess energy and they want to sell it to the grid, but the price is relatively low. So we set it with some tries, but we found that it's the optimum amount.
Perfect. Thanks for explanation. I have a David also. David, floor is yours for a question or comment.
Thank you. This is David from the University of Geneva. One question on the objective. It seems that you balance two terms, and you define them, one of them as cost, but this refers to the cost of just purchasing electricity, or it also includes the cost of purchasing technology? And then the other one was related to exchanging electricity, that I got the understanding that you don't want to you want to really, not sure if avoid that is maximized to the exchanging of electricity. So in short, it's not clear for me the objective function. So whether the question is whether you can elaborate more on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I get your question. As you said, the objective function has two terms, and it's a kind of a multi-objective function. However, we related these two terms with two weighting factors that scale the cost with the power, and the model is objective multi-objective function. So the cost and the amount of power that should be exchanged is the two term of this objective function.
Hope you get your answers. And since that we should close the session, there is a closing of the conference session is running soon. So if anything else that you can contact Aragon via email or to continue your conversation. Thanks for raising a great question. And thanks for all speakers for great presentations. We all learn a lot, and for the audience to participate in, to listen and participate in question and answer part. So I would like to invite you all to join for closing of the conference, which you can go through the conference platform and through joining to the room for a closing sessions. And thanks to you all and have a great day.